Welcome to Short Movie Channel. At the beginning of today's movie story, we see the city of Hong Kong, specifically the poor neighborhoods, which are preparing for a mixed martial arts tournament called Kumite. The tournament is surrounded by complete secrecy, and we learn that only top competitors and fighters from different countries and nations come to participate. At the same time, in the gym of the U.S. Marine Corps, we see Captain Frank Dux training alone. One of his Navy colleagues tells him that the colonel wants to speak with him. Frank asks for a moment, and tells his colleague he'll be there after his shower. However, Frank takes this opportunity to escape, and it's immediately reported that he has run away. The colonel sends his two best men to chase Frank. Frank reaches his home, where his mentor, Mr. Tanaka, lives in California. His wife greets him warmly, but since her husband is very sick, she needs some time to tell him he's there. Frank looks around and recalls when he was younger, hanging out with his friends and sneaking into Mr. Tanaka's house. They wanted to steal the sword, but when they heard the door opening, they quickly ran off, while Frank stayed put and didn't run. Later, he tried to return the weapon to its original place, and just then, Mr. Tanaka and his son entered quickly. Mr. Tanaka's son punched Frank in the stomach. Then Mr. Tanaka told Frank that the katana sword could not be stolen, it had to be earned. Frank explained that he never intended to steal the sword. In a swift moment, Mr. Tanaka cut off the front part of Frank's hat with the katana sword. Mr. Tanaka, who teaches Japanese martial arts, decided to visit Frank's parents and gave them an encouraging and motivational speech. He spoke about the importance of teaching kids discipline and strength through martial arts training. He also said he wanted to train their son, Frank, and they happily agreed to his proposal. However, the truth was that Tanaka only needed Frank to be like a punching bag for his son. He began training his son through Frank rather than training him himself. Frank objected, saying he should be training himself, not his son. But Tanaka responded that he brought Frank there to help train his son, not for Frank to train himself. One day, Tanaka's son was at school, and some boys started picking on him and hitting him. Fortunately, Frank was there and managed to deal with the bullies, even beating them. The boy told Frank that he wanted to be a good fighter so that his father would be proud of him, but sadly, he couldn't achieve his dream and passed away. After this tragedy, Tanaka decided to stop training, but Frank asked him to continue training him. Tanaka refused and told him that he wasn't Japanese. Tanaka then revealed to Frank that before coming to the US, he had a family in Japan. He had a wife, a son, and a daughter who lived in Hiroshima. Unfortunately, they died in the war. When he came here, his goal was to start over and teach his son the martial arts that his family had passed down for 2,000 years. Frank promised he would honor his mentor by winning the Kumite tournament. Tanaka agreed to train Frank. Tanaka smiled and taught Frank many skills, such as hand fishing to increase his speed and agility, as well as training while blindfolded. Thanks to these techniques, Frank's fighting abilities grew day by day, and he became capable of defending against surprise attacks even while unconscious. During his training period, Frank broke Tanaka's training equipment. After finishing all of his training and exercises, Mr. Tanaka awarded Frank with the katana sword as a reward. A few days later, Frank entered his coach's room and told him he was going to Hong Kong to participate in the Kumite tournament. Tanaka confirmed that he would go with him to support him in the competition. Frank traveled to Hong Kong and stayed in the hotel where all the fighters were staying for the tournament. Suddenly, a journalist named Janice appeared, wanting to interview the fighters about the secret tournament, but none of them wanted to talk to her or reveal anything. At the same time, 2 police officers arrived at Tanaka's house and asked Mrs. Tanaka about Frank. She told them he had visited them 2 days ago, but she didn't know where he went after that. Then the hotel manager greeted Frank and Jackson and told them that this year's Kumite tournament was going to be extremely tough. He mentioned that fighters from all over the world would be participating and warned them not to get into fights outside of the tournament, as that could lead to being disqualified. He then took them to the tournament location, which turned out to be in mainland China, not Hong Kong. When Frank was registering for the tournament, he told them that his coach, Mr. Tanaka, had been training him, but the organizers didn't believe him, especially since he wasn't Japanese. They asked him to prove his skills, and the challenge was to break the bottom brick. Frank successfully broke the brick, to the amazement of everyone present. At that moment, 2 police officers arrived in Hong Kong to look for Frank. They told Inspector Actor they had come to stop Frank from participating in the tournament. Inspector Actor hesitated to pursue a military man who hadn't broken any laws in his own country. Meanwhile, in the hotel, a fighter tried to take Janice by force, insisting she go with him, but she refused. When he tried to hit her, Frank appeared just in time to intervene. He told the fighter to stop causing trouble, or he would be disqualified from the tournament. Frank then suggested they settle it with a challenge. The winner would take Janice with them. The challenge was that Frank would place a coin in the fighter's palm, and if Frank could take it faster than the fighter could close his hand, Frank would win. If the fighter managed to close his hand faster, he would win. The fighter agreed to the challenge, and Frank thought back to when Mr. Tanaka taught him speed and how to catch fish with his hands. In the blink of an eye, Frank took the coin from the fighter's hand, and surprisingly, he placed another coin in his own hand. Everyone was amazed by Frank's speed. Frank saved Janice from the fighter's harassment, and took her with him. Janice told him she wanted to write an article about the secret Kumite tournament. But Frank tells her that fighters aren't allowed to do that or talk about the tournament, or they'll get kicked out. The next day, the Kumite tournament begins, and the organizers inform everyone that the Kumite only happens once every 5 years and lasts for 3 days. Everyone, including the fighters and spectators, starts placing their bets on the fighters, as we see. The fighters begin their matches, and they're all intense, brutal battles. Jackson steps into the ring to face a lightweight fighter. As for Jackson, the fighter attacks him, landing strong punches and kicks, which causes Jackson to get hurt and exhausted. But with one powerful punch, he knocks out his opponent and wins the match. Jackson points to the champion, a Chinese fighter named Shun Lee. When Jackson returns to his spot next to Frank, Frank asks him about Shun Lee. Jackson says that Shun Lee is the Kumite champion, and no one has ever defeated him. The hotel manager tells them that in the last tournament, Shun Lee killed his opponent, enjoying watching him die in front of him. After that, Shun Lee enters the ring to fight an easy opponent. In just 14 seconds he defeats him, setting a new record in the tournament. The next match is between Frank and the fighter who challenged him in the coin toss game at the hotel. Frank has no trouble at all, easily defeating his opponent without breaking a sweat. The matches continue, with fighters from all over the world showing off different techniques and styles of martial arts and self-defense. Meanwhile, Inspector Actor changes his mind and tells the police officers to head to the hotel where Frank Dux is staying. The officers immediately go to the address and tell Frank that he needs to come with them and withdraw from the Kumite tournament. But Frank tells them that he'll be at the airport in 2 days. However, they refuse and say, "We're forced to, and we have orders to take you back now." At that moment, Jackson intervenes to help Frank and takes down the police officers, giving Frank a chance to escape. After a long chase through the city, Frank manages to shake off the officers and flee. When he arrives at the tournament site, he discovers that Janice entered strangely with one of the managers and organizers there. Then, a series of fights begins, and everyone enjoys watching them, except Janice, who is really disturbed by what's happening. From her perspective, these are brutal, illegal fights that need to be stopped at all costs. Shun Lee enters the ring and completely destroys his opponent. He's incredibly sadistic and shows no mercy. He even breaks his opponent's leg and finishes him off. Meanwhile, Frank continues to make his way through the tournament, winning 5 straight fights without a single loss. Finally, he faces off against the black fighter, who keeps threatening and taunting Frank. As soon as the fight starts, Frank easily defeats his opponent. The next match Frank faces is against a huge and powerful fighter. This fighter grabs Frank and tries to crush him, aiming to break his spine, but Frank manages to break free and escape. In the end, Frank lands a powerful punch under the belt, which leads him to victory. When Shun Lee sees Frank's strength, he becomes nervous and starts calculating his moves. After that, Shun Lee and Jackson are about to face each other in the ring. With all his strength and aggression, Jackson attacks Shun Lee. In just a few seconds, they exchange powerful blows, knocking Jackson out, and he falls to the ground unconscious. But Jackson makes a big mistake when he celebrates with the crowd. This gives Shun Lee the chance to regain consciousness, get back on his feet, and launch a strong and lethal counterattack. He knocks Jackson down again and delivers a powerful kick to his head. He grabs Jackson's bandana, which was tied around his head, and mocks him. Frank then places Jackson in the hospital and promises to avenge him by taking on Shun Lee. Later that night, Janice goes to the police station and asks Inspector Actor to shut down the Kumite tournament because of the chaos and bloody fights happening there. The next day, after finishing his meditation exercises, Frank is on his way home when a fight breaks out between him and some police officers. Frank defeats the officers and takes their electric shock devices. Suddenly, Janice appears and tells Frank that she's the one who tipped off the police about the Kumite location. Frank tells the officers he'll meet them at the airport tomorrow, then leaves them and walks away. Janice takes the officers and heads to the tournament. They find Frank, who defeats his opponent in the semifinals. Everyone is excited and proud of him. In the next match, Shun Lee faces a fighter who's lighter and less experienced than him. Shun Lee defeats him easily, breaking his neck and finishing him off. He then walks toward Frank and says, "Now it's your turn." The crowd starts placing their bets on the final match between Frank and Shun Lee. Both fighters prepare to face off. We see that Shun Lee's coach and assistant slip a piece of chalk into his pants. When the two fighters enter the ring, Frank notices that Shun Lee has tied Jackson's bandana around his leg. Shun Lee says to Frank, "I'm going to finish you off just like I finished your friend Jackson." The fight starts, and from the very first second, Frank attacks Shun Lee with all his might, delivering powerful kicks to Shun Lee's head. Shun Lee tries to show Frank and the audience his strength, but during this time, Frank recalls the days he spent training with Master Tanaka, blindfolded, and regains his abilities. He manages to block Shun Lee's attacks and even starts counterattacking, landing powerful and lethal punches and kicks. Frank locks in a submission move, and Shun Lee finally surrenders. Frank takes Jackson's bandana from Shun Lee, and everyone celebrates his victory, including Janice and the police officers. Frank is announced as the winner of the Kumite tournament and is awarded a katana sword. Afterward, Frank visits Jackson in the hospital and reassures him, then boards the plane with the officers. Janice accompanies him because he's returning with them to the United States, especially after achieving his dream and keeping his promise to his master. Frank has now become one of the champions of the Kumite tournament. And that's how our movie ends. I hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget, if you liked the video, to support us with a like and subscribe.